Today we're going to continue in our study of the book of James. Today we're going to be looking at James chapter 5 verses 1 through 6. Remember, James is speaking to his scattered congregation. Many are suffering economic persecution. Their money has been spent, stolen, or illegally confiscated just because they're Christians. Their economic plight is distressing to them and robbing them of their victory in Jesus Christ. The victory that he won for them and won for us on the cross. Much of the trouble that they're going through is based upon a worldly view of wealth. It's a view that traps people into Satan's view and Satan's manipulation of what wealth should be made of. Living faith rejects this worldly view of wealth, which leads to victory in our lives. James is not denying the economic trials that his people are going through, but he reminds them that as long as they have a worldly view of wealth, they're going to be trapped and not have victory in Jesus Christ. James' desire is to point out that worldly wealth will only lead to bondage and wanting more, which will ultimately lead to their destruction. In pointing this out, James hopes to help his congregation recognize that those who are persecuting them economically are really on their path to destruction. And when they focus on those people in that negative way, how they're being persecuted economically and thinking that these people are doing well, that leads them into a misunderstanding of God's position on wealth, and it leads them to bondage. So many people today find themselves in bondage to money and material possessions, and this bondage is something that sneaks up on the best of us until it's got us. And then we have to find a way to get unshackled. So this message is for us as well as it was for them. Victory is possible as we reject the world's view of wealth and adopt God's understanding of wealth. Everybody from the poorest person to the richest person and most wise and powerful people can fall into the trap that leads to financial bondage. One man went to his doctor. He had all kinds of back pain, lower back pain. And the doctor examined him, and the doctor said, my initial diagnosis is that you either have a bulging disc or a ruptured disc. He says, we're going to need to take some tests to confirm this diagnosis, so I'll set you up with all these tests. The man goes through all the tests. Doctor gets the results and calls him back in for his consultation. And the man says, hey doc, put it in layman's terms. What is the diagnosis and how do we deal with it? And the doc said, you got a wallet? The man said, yeah. The doc said, take your wallet out of your pants and give it to me. The man took the wallet out of his pants and it was bulging with all kinds of credit cards and some cash. And the doctor said, here's the diagnosis. Your wallet is putting pressure on your sciatic nerve, which is causing all your pain. The treatment is a walletectomy. The fact that he had so many credit cards and so a little bit of cash demonstrated how he was trapped in the world's understanding of what wealth is and how you're supposed to use money. Because the world says, make all you can get all you can take, and the guy who dies with the most toys is the winner. God says, you can't take any of it with you. Money's to be used. It's not to be accumulated per se. James has his desire to share with his congregation that the people that they're looking to and letting control their lives are people that are on the path to destruction. And should there be any amongst them that are rich and on this path, he's warning them against that. But primarily, he's warning them against the unbelievers who are persecuting them. And chapter 5, verses 1 through 6 says this. Now listen, you rich people, weep and wail because of the misery that is coming upon you. Your wealth has rotted and moths have eaten your clothes. Your gold and silver are corroded. Their corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. You have hoarded wealth in the last days. Look, the wages you failed to pay your workmen who mowed your fields are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. You have lived on earth in luxury and self-indulgence. You have fattened yourself in the day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered innocent men who are not opposing you. James first warns against idle wealth. He warns against idle wealth. He says, now listen, he's getting their attention. The words that he's using are words commanding an audience. And he's commanding the rich people to listen to him. You've got a wrong idea on how wealth is to be used. You've got a wrong idea that's going to lead you down a path of destruction. He said, weep and wail. This is a weeping and wailing that are tears not of a penitent, but of the condemned. He says this path is going to take you down to that place where you are condemned, and you're going to be weeping and wailing for eternity. He says, pay attention. Listen to what I have to say. Misery is coming, and your wealth is corrupted. Riches in the biblical time basically were controlled by 4 commodities. You had oil, grain, precious metals, and rich clothing. So if you were going to invest your money, that's how you did it. Oil, grain, precious metals, and rich clothing. And this is what James is addressing. He's saying your wealth is idle. You're hoarding it. And as you hoard it, you've obtained more than you can even store adequately. And so what you've been hoarding is getting corrupted. Your grain's getting eaten, your oil's evaporating, your gold is tarnishing, and your clothes are getting eaten by moths. That's the way riches disappeared, with somebody who hoarded them and didn't rotate and utilize and spend. Your wealth is losing its value as it deteriorates due to you not using it. James points out God's principle that wealth is to be used and not hoarded. God doesn't say, don't accumulate money. He says, don't accumulate it and hoard it. In the less than 10 years after this letter was written, Rome destroyed Jerusalem. And except for the select few who were politically connected to Rome, the riches that anybody had hoarded were confiscated, and they no longer had them. He said, idle wealth is wealth that isn't used and will eventually be lost. It's either going to be lost through attrition, or it'll be lost by conquest, or it'll be lost at death. Idle wealth doesn't do anybody any good. Hetty Green was once the richest woman in America. She had amassed over $100 million. But Hetty was a spinster. She didn't want to spend a penny on anything. So in the wintertime, she'd stuff her coat full of newspapers to keep herself warm. She would read the morning newspaper and then sell it to somebody else. When she would take the train back and forth from where she was living to New York, where her factories were, she would sit up all night in the coach car rather than spend the extra little bit of money to get a Pullman berth so that she could sleep. The reason she had to take the train is because she didn't want to pay income tax. So rather than buy a house in New York where her shops and factories were, she would be in New Jersey living in boarding houses under assumed names so that the IRS could never catch up with her. Hetty would go up into the attic of her warehouse and separate the colored rags from the white rags because the garbage man would pay 1 cent a pound more for the white rags than he would for the colored rags. When Hetty got to be 82, she deteriorated in her health, and she had to be taken care of by registered nurses. The registered nurses, however, were ordered not to wear uniforms because there's no way that Hetty could die in peace if she knew that she was paying that high price for the registered nurse to take care of her. She was master of nothing. Rather, she was enslaved to money. And God says that's what happens when you have a worldly view. But let's contrast that with another woman who once turned down thousands of proposals of marriage from wealthy people and even a prince. One prince had followed her around for a year, seeking her for his bride. And she kept turning him away. She got so many invitations to marriage in the mail, her secretary even stopped giving them to her. She was a highly prized woman. And by the time she was in her grandparent age years, with her dark red hair streaked with gray, she was still getting proposals. This woman was Evangeline Booth, the daughter of William Booth, the originator of the Salvation Army. Evangeline saw money as a tool, and she would feed hungry. She would clothe those who couldn't afford clothing. She reached out to over 80 different language groups through the Salvation Army to bring the gospel of Jesus Christ. She had money. Believe me, she had money. And she used it. But it was her slave. It was never her master. God's view of money brings victory in our lives. Then James says, these rich people have tainted wealth. They have tainted wealth. He says, you failed to pay the reapers of your field. You failed to pay the harvesters their wages. God takes notice, James said, of their distress. You got rich on their backs, and it's going to come back to haunt you. In the days of James, it was simply the word of the rich over the word of the poor, and he could not pay them, and nothing would be done. Today, you just declare bankruptcy, and your personal wealth is yours, and you cheat all your employees out of their wages, and your vendors out of their money. It hasn't changed. The rich who have a worldly view will continue to gain wealth on the backs of others. And they don't care as long as they can get and not lose. And then he says, you rich, you gain wealth ruthlessly. You're so self-indulgent in your lifestyle. Luxury, which leads to a lessening of moral standards, is the norm for you. The more money you get, the less you're concerned about anybody else, and the more concerned you are about your pleasures at any cost. Self-indulgence describes the extravagant, wasteful living at any cost. We don't see that today at all, do we? And then he brings a word of condemnation. He says, you have fatted yourselves for the day of slaughter. He said, you can't take it with you? You're going to die. You're going to die fat and rich, and your money's going to be useless to you. There is the eternal punishment of the unredeemed, because most of the rich find it hard to believe that they need God. They get trapped in that sense that I only need to make money. I don't need anybody else, and I don't need God. The picture is that they were so taken up with gratifying themselves that they did not take notice that the day of judgment was coming. And the day of judgment came to Israel within a very short period of time after James wrote this letter. Rome conquered them, and their riches were taken away. What James is talking about, he says, you get so wrapped up into this mode of getting that you become like the frog in a pot of water, that you turn the flame on the bottom and gradually increase it. It won't jump out because it's cold-blooded, and it adapts to its surroundings until it's boiled to death. So that's what's going to happen to you with this self-indulgent view, with this ruthless sense of gaining wealth. You destroyed the lives of those opposed you. You threw innocent people into jail just to keep what you wanted. You even had people murdered so that you could keep what you felt was yours. We don't see that today either, do we? A number of years ago, a farmer paid $10 to the town miser just to walk with the town miser to the bank to see his riches. Miser had the bank owner open the vault, and he showed him the stacks of money that were his. And the farmer goes, now I'm just like you. And he goes, what do you mean you're just like me? He says, I'm just as good as you are. He says, what do you mean you're just as good as I am? The farmer replied, you never use your money. You just look at it. Now that I've looked at it, I'm just as good as you are. He amassed wealth and did nothing with it except hoard it, which is the world's view of money. Get, and never give away. Living faith rejects a worldly view of wealth, and this leads to victory in life. Money? Of course, Evangeline Booth had it, and she used it, but it was her slave and never her master. An example of how God views wealth: when we use our wealth for the kingdom of God, we gain victory in our lives here on earth, and a reward is waiting for us in heaven. Let's pray.